Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bread Axiom. I haven't really been making a lot of videos lately. I took a little break, was kind of doing some studying and figuring some things out. Looked into applying to seminary, so that's been an adventure, trying to see how that was going to go, looking into different schools and different applications and stuff. But I really just, after all of that, I just really decided that this is kind of the avenue that I want to go for a while. This particular video is kind of an introduction to the introduction of the channel. So what this one's going to focus on is just walking through kind of the feeling of the channel. My name's Caleb. I'm just a guy. I'm not a preacher, not a pastor, not a I'm not a scholar. I'm just somebody who is super passionate about all of these different types of topics. I've gotten really, really, really passionate about this over the last several years. Obviously, looking into seminary, probably have to be pretty passionate about it to go down that pathway. Um, but today we're just going to talk about what the bread axiom is, what the channel is going to cover, the manner in which we're going to conduct ourselves, what we want the channel to really be like and be about. Some of the reasons why I started getting involved and becoming passionate about this stuff. So this is going to be, like I said, an introduction to the introduction series of the channel. So this will probably be a couple of short, simple videos going through some really basic points and kind of working our way through um, what the channel is about and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So let's move to the little walkthrough. Um, so really what it's going to end up being is um, this channel is primarily going to be about just the Christian life in general. So it's a process. I'm not even remotely close to being the man that I should be. So it's going to be about those kinds of things. Apologetics is actually what brought me back to believing in Jesus. So we'll do maybe not a lot of apologetics, but definitely we're going to touch on that. Some of the videos that are already on the channel are definitely more that avenue of things. But then I'm also going to be doing some topical studies. Some of those are kind of already on the channel pretty loosely. We did a little bit into omniscience, just going through a bunch of verses about the knowledge of God. And then one of the things I really want to do is I want to do methods of study. I haven't really seen, I hear a lot of people talk about, hey, I put in this many hours of study. I did this study on this topic and I did it for this long and it took me, months to figure this out. Well, I really want to go through how I do it, show kind of the methodology. People can give me suggestions, say what works for them, maybe even, learn something from it. I want to walk through some studying tools, the things that I did. I'll do some free ones, and then obviously I've gotten some different ones as I've gone along and gotten more involved and needed to kind of up my game a little bit. I needed a little bit better, some better tools. And then at some point we're going to go through books that, you know, books that I think are worth reading. And so that's really what the channel is probably going to focus on for the most part are things that I'm reading, tools, the methods that I'm doing. I'm thinking about building a series that's just every time I study something, I just record my study session so that people can see kind of how I work through it, and maybe learn something from it. Um, Obviously, topics, apologetics, and then just things that are going on. Maybe we'll talk about current events. Already disappoint. I probably won't do a ton of political stuff. That's not really on my agenda. And as you'll see in my how I want to do things section, that'll probably start to kind of make a little bit more sense. So how I want to do this, I'm just going to rush. I'm just going to breeze through this, and then I'll actually tackle some of these things in more depth later on. But these first two parts are pretty much what this video is primarily going to be about, and then I'll just breeze through the rest, and I'll dig into those in individual videos to kind of elaborate a little bit more. So what how I want to do things, I want people to understand that I'm just a person. I'm even if I was a pastor, they're just men. We're all just men and women living life. I mean, I'm just a man. I'm like everybody else. I'm nothing special. I'm just like everybody else is. I'm not a teacher. I'm just passionate. It should be obvious, but I'm not God. I don't think I'm God. I hope I never put off the impression that I am in any way. Um, Obviously, that would make this channel completely pointless and counterintuitive. I want to conduct it with honesty, integrity, and really a lack of authoritative teaching. while I'm also being thoughtful. But the lack of authoritative teaching is something that I'm going to touch on later in the videos. But that's really something that I want to make people aware of, is that I'm not the leader. I'm not the spokesperson. I'm just a person, like everybody else. And so I don't really want to put an authoritative stamp on things. I want to make sure that people understand that I pretty much believe that anything that I teach or think is my opinion, outside of a handful of like what I would consider to be non-negotiables. But I also want to do it in an approachable way, and I don't really want to do like simple surface level discussion stuff. I'm probably not going to do a whole lot on like, hey, my grandma died, where did she go? Like the common questions. I don't think that's what this channel is going to be about. Maybe it is. Maybe it ends up going that route as people get involved and start seeking answers. Maybe that's something that I end up doing, but that's not my intention at the moment. I want it to be deeper, and for people who are seriously passionate about questioning things, challenging what they think or what they have been taught, and not necessarily to come to a different conclusion, but if you don't challenge it, you don't understand it. In my opinion, from my experience, you don't understand it. And so I really want to challenge. I want there to be deep, challenging, difficult questions that are discussed and answered. And with everything on this channel, because I'm not telling you as an authoritative source, use discernment. Understand that just because I suggest something, just because I say something, does not make it dogma, does not make it doctrine. It just means that it's my opinion, and at the current moment, that's what I think. And maybe I change that, and you should take any of my statements with, with a heavy dose of discernment. Just because I'm a voice doesn't mean I'm the right voice. So just keep that in mind. That's what I really want this channel to be like. That's how I want this channel to be embodied. I want it to embody those particular things. And then, so it's just some of the I'm just going to touch briefly on some of the reasons I feel this is so important, what drew me to doing this kind of stuff, why I think these things are necessary. So one of the things that I got into is that I started finding out, especially as I was studying people who are teaching dogmatic doctrines, even though they're heavily contested. And so down here, you'll see doctrinal dogmatism. You'll see this phrase down here. So whenever I say, using like the vision of the church, whenever I say the church, I'm meaning it in the Protestant manner. So like, for example, the Catholic Church is a different vision than the Protestant church. The church in the Protestant view is really just people that are Christ followers. They're Christians. They're part of the church in that sense. So there's a little bit of a difference between the Catholic view and then the Protestant view. So if you're unfamiliar with that, that's probably something this channel will end up getting into, the differences. But just for the sake of this conversation, just keep that in mind, that when I say that phrase, I'm referring to the Protestant view that's just anyone who believes in Jesus, they are the church, not necessarily like some official magisterial organization, so to speak. So I started getting very, very heavily interested in what is referred to as Calvinism. I had never really heard of it, but I had heard of predestination and predetermination in the past. Well, a lot of that, the underpinnings to that are really heavily rooted in something that is just colloquially, like not officially. They probably wouldn't even like the title. They would just call themselves Christians, but Calvinism is just the standard phrase. So please take that with, it's not a jab. It's not I'm not trying to belittle anything or make it sound bad. It's just the common vernacular is how it's referred to as Calvinism, which is basically that God decreed everything, period. Everything that ever comes to pass, God decreed it. Well, in that, I started hearing really authoritative, dogmatic teachings that this is true, this is the way that it is. And I was like, that's really weird. And a handful of verses would come up. So, for example, Revelation 13:8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. So I read that, and then I compared that to Revelation 17:8, and I'll show you real quick what that is. So I did a bunch of comparisons. There's New American Standard, NASB. That's the one that I tend to use. It's not because it's particular. It's not because it's the best. It's just the one that I like. I think it's the most not appropriate, but the most in line with the way that I want to study. I want to have hard passages to read that I really have to work through. Whereas like New Living Translation, NIV, they're much more paraphrasey. The New Living Translation is definitely paraphrasey, but NIV is more paraphrase oriented than strict literal translation. But anyway, so NASB. The specific phrase is from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. So from the foundation of the world. So NASB, from the foundation of the world. ASV, from the foundation of the world. New King James. Where's 8? Here we go. Written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Then you get the ESV. And all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world. So the Greek phrase is apo kataboles kosmo. And if you notice, 1, 2, 3, 3 of the translations all do from, and it's way more than that. From what I've seen, there's no other translation that does before, except for the ESV. And I'm sure that that's not true. I'm sure that there's at least one other that does it, but that's just, in this particular instance, the ESV is the one that really stood out to me, because it's the one that, the ESV is the translation I read the entire Bible all the way through. And so I caught this. Well, this phrase, apo kataboles kosmo, means from. So apo means from or since a point in time. So from a marker or separation or dissociation, from a marker, from. So all of these are of a marker or from a marker. So you could be since or because of, upon, but from is the dominant way that this is used. Well, what happened is I found this, and apo kataboles kosmo. It's a very similar phrase. In fact, it's identical in the Greek to Revelation 17:8. So Revelation 17:8, you have from the foundation of the world. NASB 13:8 and 17:8 are consistent. Revelation 17:8 in ASV, been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So they're consistent. New King James, from the foundation of the world. That one was consistent. ESV, however, has not been written in the book of the life from the foundation of the world. Well, I was like, weird, that's the same basic verse, or the same basic phrasing. But 13:8 ESV has for, 17:8 it has from. I was like, okay, so what's the Greek say? Well, that's what's so interesting to me. This is what really started to get me going down this particular path. It is ato kataboles kosmo. The exact same phrase. Well, apo means from. That's why every single other translation has from. In fact, even the ESV in 17:8 has from. I started looking into it, and I started looking into the committee behind the ESV. And please, I'm not trying to belittle them or put them down. I'm just saying a lot of them tend to be Calvinist, maybe Southern Baptist, just things like that. They have that leaning. And maybe that's not exclusive. It's just a trend that I saw. And so I checked, and I found out that apo kataboles kosmo is quoted, I think, something like, 7 times in the New Testament. And in every other place in the ESV, it's done as from. Even in the ESV, it's from the foundation of the world. The ESV has it the same in every single spot, except for the 13:8 one. And so translation really started to get me interested. And then I started looking in, and there's some additional ones that we'll go through in some of the following videos. But that's one of the big things is, if you don't take an interest, if you're not passionate about this topic, and you just read a translation, especially if you're somebody who just sticks to one translation and doesn't venture, you're really not getting, well, I shouldn't say you're not getting, you're most likely not going to get the really deep subtleties. You're going to miss something. And if there's an error in there, and I don't mean error in the source, I mean an error in the translation, then you're really not going to get the full picture. So in general, I've never found a version that's not good for studying, in general. But there's just going to be things that you're going to have problems with. That's just the reality of it. I can just say that flatly, that if you just stay NASB, you're going to miss things. If you just stay ESV, you're going to miss things. If you just stay KJV, you're going to miss things. And we'll get into that more. I'll especially touch those things much more deeply as there's some additional passages, so like 1 John 5, 7 through 8, Romans 14, 10, comparing the NASB 95 to 2020 with all the other versions. There's just a big difference. And then we're going to get into some doctrinal dogmatism, some overextended authority in preaching, the search for the church, tradition versus heresy, and, like what we divide over. So these are just all things that we really want to talk about. I really want to focus this channel, and especially in these introductions, on these things. I want to get into these in depth, teaching something dogmatically, saying something is in an authoritative way as if there is no other interpretation when they're heavily contested in the church, in the Protestant sense, the church. Even the search for the church itself, the Catholic versus Protestant, which I'm unresolved on. I was raised Protestant. I currently align Protestant, but I'm open to being a Catholic if it's the truth. I have done a lot of study on this, and I'm currently firmly convinced about Protestantism, but that doesn't mean my study is definitely not done. And that's something heavily contested. To draw a battle line and say this or that, I think is, without having really studied it and really understanding it, I think is a very dangerous thing that we do. Because if the Catholic definition of the church is true, it is a massive difference. It makes a massive difference in the way in which you practice your faith. They're not even in the same ballpark, really. Tradition versus heresy. This is basically just about what do we divide over? Like just because something is intellectually anathematized, which means like forbidden or damnable for believing. Do we divide over these things? Just because people did divide, should we divide on them? Or should we really consider maybe they have a thought, but they haven't made conclusions about that yet? And I just really want to be careful about that. That's really become a big issue with me, is I grew up with all these dividing lines and things you had to believe and things you weren't allowed to believe. And it's like, do we want to do that? Or should we really press somebody and see what their full picture is and guide them through things rather than separating ourselves from them? Waking up from our slumber is about really recognizing the difference between a dead faith and a living faith. So we'll talk about that quite a bit, especially in my own personal journey. And then I want to do an entire series on the ways to study and my study methods. I started off with free methods that really helped to kind of get me really interested. Revelation 13:8 was a great passage where I started using free methods to kind of dig into that and build my perspective on that. And then I'll show that compared to some paid methods. And then I want to make sure that people understand, like, if I recommend an author, go listen to a lecture, go listen to them talk about the subject. That's something that I had to start doing. I bought books by like Bill Johnson, for example, and which, don't get me wrong, maybe people love him, but for me, when he would teach, I was like, I don't agree with any of that. But I had bought his books before looking into him, and you can just go watch him preach for free. So go listen to him preach, go listen to him talk about these types of things, or not him, but anyone, any author. Go listen to them speak. Make sure that you can tell that they're using discernment, that they're being reasonable, that they're presenting their information in an appropriate and acceptable way. They're having humility. They're not necessarily teaching authoritatively, so that you can see that humility in them. Go do that. Don't just take my word for it on a book, but go look, investigate them a little bit. It'll safeguard you from spending money on things you won't even invest the time in. If you're not going to watch a video of an hour, are you going to read an 8-hour long book or a 10-hour long book? But probably not. Especially if you find out that you disagree with something at the beginning of it, which you could easily find out by just watching them speak. And then I'll get into books that helped me, really got me inspired. And the most important thing with all of this is remember that discernment is always implied. I'm always going to imply that. If I say something, use discernment. Don't just trust me. Don't just take my word for it. That's why I started us off with, I'm just a person. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a scholar. I'm just someone who's really interested, and I just want to share some passion and show how I'm doing things. And that's really all there is to it. So, welcome to the Bread Axiom. I'll be getting into some of these things really in a much more nitty gritty and broken down way. And I look forward to talking more with all of you guys and seeing you guys in the next video. Have a good one.